Well, welcome to Marking the End Times. I'm Mark Hitchcock. On today's program, I want to talk about the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war. Early next week, this war will mark 1,000 days. I mean, think about that, 1,000 days that this brutal war has been grinding on. And the conflict is intensifying right now dramatically. Russia is currently mounting a major counteroffensive to try to claw back some of the territory in Russia that was taken by Ukraine in August. Back in August, Ukraine made a daring cross-border raid. Think about this. This was the first time that foreign troops had invaded Russian soil since World War II. Ukraine went into the Kursk region and took some of the area in Russia, and they've been holding it since that period of time. The first ground invasion into Russia since World War II. Now, Russia currently is mounting a massive counteroffensive. And in this, we'll talk about this on today's program, they're employing over 10,000 North Korean troops. It's a major development. So I want to talk about why Russia is acting now and how that's significant for what's coming in the future. Now, before we get to today's program, I want to mention what we're going to go to here a bit in the subscriber-only section. Today, we're going to answer some questions. We haven't done that in a while, so some really good questions. Let me just mention these questions so you can have these in your mind. Debbie asked the question, you answered in a question about the 10 Commandments that we should obey them out of love for God and pleasing Him. What about keeping the Sabbath holy? If we attend church on Sundays, are we obeying it? So a very good question about keeping the Sabbath. Jeremy asks, could Trump coming to power bring about peace and security for Israel? And fast forward Ezekiel 38. Greg asks, I enjoyed your discussion about the 10 Commandments. What about tithing? I know it's part of the old law and we're no longer under that law, but is it relevant today? So a couple really good questions about the Old Covenant and the 10 Commandments. And then finally, Sarah asks, referencing 1 Thessalonians 4:15-17, when this happens, that's the passage about the rapture, will only the believers hear the loud command with the voice of the archangel and the trumpet call of God, or will non-believers hear this as well and quickly realize they were not called home? So some great questions to answer here a little bit. I'm in that subscriber-only section. We'll go there here in just a few moments. Well, as I said earlier, that the war in Ukraine is ramping up significantly. It's been reported this last week that there are now, for Russia, over 700,000 casualties. Now, not all those are dead, many dead and wounded, but over 700,000 casualties. Newsweek reported this week that the Russian losses are record losses for the second consecutive day. That's a very, very grim statistic. Russia and Ukraine just this week traded the biggest drone attacks of the conflict. So the drone attacks are ramping up dramatically. Both sides are kind of pulling out all the stops. And the biggest development, though, that's happening over there is the Russian push to retake this Kursk region of Russia that the Ukrainians were able to take back in August. CNN has a headline this week that large group of Russian and North Korean forces are prepared to retake Russia's Kursk region. So Russia is pushing back right now, and they're pushing back hard. This article says Russia has amassed a large force of tens of thousands, including recently arrived North Korean troops, to carry out an assault on the Ukrainian positions in Russia's Kursk region, expected in the coming days. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky said Thursday about 11,000 North Korean soldiers are in the region, where Ukraine's 3-month military incursion into Russian territory has stalled. The New York Times reported Sunday that some 50,000 Russian and North Korean troops are set to take part in this assault. Goes on in this article and says this about this Ukrainian commander. He said the North Korean troops are a significant resource for Russia's war on Ukraine, as even those being deployed defensively would free up Russian troops for assault operations elsewhere. So even if these North Korean troops aren't on the offensive, they can be put in defensive positions, which obviously frees up Russian soldiers to be more on the offensive. So he says in military terms, they amount to 3 full-blooded brigades. Imagine that now the enemy withdraws 10,000 soldiers from a second line of defense, puts those soldiers from North Korea there, and sends these 3 brigades into one of the places where active hostilities are underway. So this is a huge way to bolster Russia's military effort. The Guardian this week has an article that says, the headline says, Ukraine war briefing, North Korea ratifies landmark mutual defense pact with Russia. So this is happening at the same time. This article in The Guardian says this, there's just one paragraph. It says, North Korea has ratified a landmark mutual defense pact with Russia, weeks after sending thousands of troops to help Moscow in its war against Ukraine and sealing a deepening security cooperation between the two nations. The deal was ratified as a decree of Kim Jong-un, the Korean Central News Agency said. The notice comes after Russian lawmakers voted unanimously last week to ratify the deal, which President Vladimir Putin later signed. So there's a really powerful coalition now between Russia and North Korea. Of course, Russia has more nuclear weapons than anyone on earth, and North Korea is a nuclear power as well. Another CNN headline says Ukraine is fighting 50,000 troops in Russia's Kursk region. So Russian forces have launched this massive counteroffensive into this Kursk region. And it says in this article, they stormed with a battalion-sized force. So this is a massive counteroffensive. Now, as I read about all this and thought about all this, one of the questions that came to my mind is, why is all this ramping up and escalating right now? Why is this happening at this time? I think one of the reasons certainly is there's an uncertainty over what President Trump will do when he's inaugurated. So I think a lot of this is in preparation for the Trump presidency, which of course will begin in January. You know, it's interesting. At the same time I was reading all these articles, I also read an article that said that European countries are spending more on defense. So they're unsure about what the posture of the United States might be in the future. So they're also escalating their defense spending as well. But this extraordinary escalation, I think, is taking place because I think right now each side in the Russia-Ukraine war is seeking an advantage. They're seeking leverage. Because when President Trump comes to power, he said that he's going to bring some kind of a ceasefire or peaceful negotiations to bear. And so each side wants all the leverage that they can when those negotiations take place. And everybody knows when you're negotiating, you want to be negotiating from a position of strength. You want to have all the leverage you can have. So each party wants to have all the territory they can have, then they can use those pieces then as bargaining chips in any kind of negotiations that take place in the future. So there's a scramble for both sides, I think, right now to take as much land as possible. One article I read this week called it a race against time, as they're kind of looking forward to this possible, they call it the Trump ceasefire. Now, interestingly, in the Jerusalem Post, there's an article this week that the former Russian president, Medvedev, says that Europe right now is trying to escalate the conflict after Trump's win. That Europe is trying to escalate this conflict to push it into an irreversible phase. Because there's fear with Europe that President Trump may stop supporting Ukraine to the degree that the United States has up till now. And so if they can escalate this war to kind of an irreversible phase, that will blunt any attempt by President Trump to kind of de-escalate what's happening there. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know, but that's what this former president there says. So the point here is everyone is kind of posturing right now, trying to get this war in a place where they want it to be, kind of looking ahead to this idea that there might be some kind of a ceasefire. At the end of this war, though, if President Trump is able to broker some kind of negotiation, some kind of a peace agreement or a ceasefire, the end of that war will allow Russia to rearm and to replenish. They're greatly depleted now. Again, as I said earlier, 700,000 people are their men either killed or wounded. And if there is some kind of a ceasefire and negotiated peace, and Russia's able to kind of de-escalate and rearm and replenish, that could kind of be the calm before the storm. You know, President Trump in one of his speeches said that he wants to usher into America and really to the world a golden age. I thought that was kind of an interesting term because ultimately the golden age is going to be brought in by Jesus when he comes back in his millennium. But a golden age of peace seems to be something that's out there in the future for this world before the coming of Christ. In 1 Thessalonians 5, it says, while they're saying peace and safety, it must mean there is peace and safety. Then sudden destruction will come upon them suddenly like birth pangs upon a woman. He says that they'll by no means be able to escape. So all these things that are happening right now with Russia and Ukraine, over in the Middle East, with Iran, with Gaza, all these different areas where there's war, but there seems to be some hope for peace on the horizon, all point towards this biblical scenario of a peace on the earth when Jesus comes back. One other thought here about this that came to my mind this week, I thought it's fascinating. When it says in Ezekiel chapter 38, verse 6, remember in Ezekiel 38, 1-6, we have all these different participants in the Gog-Magog war listed. There's 10 proper names there. Gog is the leader of this invasion, and then we have 9 places that are mentioned. And right at the very end, it mentions Gomer and Beth Togarmah, which are in modern-day Turkey. But then at the very end, it says, and many peoples with you. And I mentioned a few weeks ago something I'd never thought about, that all of these proxies of Iran could kind of be part of these many peoples that will be with these nations when they invade, because it's Russia, it's Iran, it's Turkey, it's Libya, Sudan, but then these other nations, it could be these proxies of Iran. So we've talked about that. But another thing that I thought of this week is, what about North Korea? You've got 11,000 North Korean troops in Russia now helping them fight this battle. That's a very compelling development. I've never thought about this before, of how inclusive and expansive that many peoples with you could be. And so we see today developments taking place that I think are things we didn't envision in the past. But what we do see, again, as we mentioned over and over again on this program, is kind of the build-up, things are paving the way, they're setting the stage for what's coming in the future. And as this Ukraine-Russia war escalates now, it may be escalating ahead of this anticipated peace that's coming there, which again can play into all these various things that the Bible predicts for the end times. We're going to go now to the subscriber-only section. Answer those really good questions that were sent in. And if you're not a subscriber, you'd like to be, you can go to endtimes.com and sign up there at endtimes.com. It's just $7 a month. It's very inexpensive for what value I think it will bring to your life spiritually, and just the hope I think it will give you in these times in which we live. So we'll go to the subscriber-only section now and answer these questions.